God sees a kind of exhaustion that no one else notices. There is a weight you carry that does not show on your body, but it consumes your mind and drains your soul. You lie down, try to rest, close your eyes, but inside everything keeps racing, as if something within you has no permission to stop. And the hardest part is not the exhaustion itself. It is feeling like you have to keep going anyway. You keep being strong for everyone, you keep solving things, you keep showing up. But there is a part of you that has already reached its limit, and maybe no one has noticed yet. Not even you wanted to admit it. But God noticed. Before you even understood what was happening inside you, God already knew. He knows the weight you have not told anyone about. He sees every silent effort, every attempt to keep going, every moment you wanted to stop but kept moving anyway. And there is something you need to understand right now. God does not come close to you when you are strong. He comes close when you can no longer carry everything on your own. Maybe today you are not here by accident. Maybe God allowed this moment because He wants to show you something you have not seen yet. This exhaustion is not the end. It is a sign that you have been carrying more than you should for too long. And as long as you keep trying to handle this alone, nothing changes. But when you understand what God is doing in the middle of this exhaustion, everything begins to shift. And that is exactly what you are about to start realizing now. There is a kind of exhaustion that does not show on your face, but God recognizes it immediately. It is a tiredness that no one sees. You keep living your routine, you keep responding, you keep functioning. But inside, something no longer has the same strength, and even if no one notices, God is looking exactly at that place. He does not just see what you do. He sees what it is costing you inside. There is a kind of exhaustion that is not physical. It is spiritual. It is the kind of wear that happens when you try to carry alone what only God was meant to carry with you. And without realizing it, you started accumulating responsibilities beyond what you could handle, accumulating emotions you never released, accumulating expectations that slowly weighed on your mind and your heart, and even so, you kept going. But there is something that changes everything when you understand it. God never asked you to be strong all the time. In the second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 12, verse 9, it is written that God's power is made perfect in weakness. That means the moment you feel at your limit is not when God steps away. It is when He begins to act more intensely. The problem is that you learned the opposite. You learned that you have to handle everything, that you have to endure, that you have to keep going, even when everything inside you is asking for help. And that is where the exhaustion deepens, because you try to solve alone what God never planned for you to face alone. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 11, verses 28 through 30, Jesus makes a direct invitation. "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Notice this. He is not speaking to those who are strong. He is calling exactly those who are tired. This changes everything. Because your exhaustion is not a problem for God. It is an access point. It is in that place that He begins to restore. It is in that place that He renews strength you thought you had already lost. But as long as you keep ignoring this exhaustion and running on autopilot, you block what God wants to do. Because recognizing your limit is not failure. It is the beginning of real dependence on God. And something is happening right now, even if you do not realize it. God is using this exhaustion to show you that there is a different way to live. A way where you do not have to carry everything alone. A way where strength does not come from you, but from Him. And when you understand that, the weight begins to shift. There comes a moment when you are no longer being strong. You are just performing strength. At that point, strength becomes an act, and that is more exhausting than any external problem, because it is not just about facing difficulties. It is about maintaining an image while you are breaking inside. It is about saying, "I'm fine," when you are not. It is about smiling, continuing, producing, solving, while your soul is silently asking for help. And the most dangerous part is that you get used to it. You get used to not speaking, not showing, not stopping, and little by little that performance becomes part of your identity. You no longer even know what it would feel like to live without that weight. But God never asked you to sustain a perfect version of yourself. In the first letter of Peter, chapter 5, verse 7, it is written, "Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you." This is not symbolic. This is direct instruction. God does not want you to manage alone what is consuming you. He does not expect you to stay in control all the time. He is not impressed by your ability to endure. He moves when you decide to surrender. And here is the point many ignore. As long as you maintain the performance, you block access. Because God does not work on characters, He works on truth. He does not enter what you hide. He enters what you surrender. And maybe that is why you still feel so tired. It is not only because of what you are facing. It is because of the constant effort to appear okay through it all. But there is a limit to that. In Psalm 34, verse 18, it is written that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Notice the condition: broken heart, crushed spirit. It is not about appearance, it is about reality. God draws near when you stop trying to carry everything alone and start being real before Him. And that takes courage. Courage to stop pretending. Courage to admit things are not okay. Courage to release what you have been holding for too long. Because as long as you keep trying to prove your strength, you distance yourself from the only source that can truly strengthen you. But when you let go, when you stop performing, when you finally allow yourself to be real before God, something changes. His presence stops being a distant idea and becomes immediate relief. And that is where restoration begins. There is something exhausting you that you have never been able to clearly explain. It is not just what happened. It is not just what you are living through right now. It is a combination of things that have been building up inside you, without a name, without pause, without release. It is a silent weight you never named, and because it has no name, you cannot confront it. These are worries you never shared, frustrations you swallowed, decisions you made under pressure, emotions you felt but never processed, and all of it stayed. It took up space inside you. It became a constant silent weight, difficult to identify, but impossible to ignore. And the most delicate part is that you learned to live with it. You kept moving forward as you always do. You kept solving things, kept being strong, kept believing that at some point it would just go away on its own. But it did not, because what is not processed remains. In the book of Psalms, chapter 32, verses 3 and 4, David describes this exact situation. He says that while he kept things to himself, his body wasted away, and his strength was drained, as in the heat of summer. Notice the depth of that. It was not an external problem. It was something internal, unreleased, unexposed, unoffered, and it began to consume his strength. Now think about yourself. How many things have you kept inside that were never brought before God? How many emotions did you ignore because you had to keep going? How many times did you say, "I will deal with this later," but never went back to resolve it? This is the weight no one sees. And this is exactly the weight God wants to touch right now. Because as long as it stays hidden, it keeps draining you. But when you begin to bring it into the light, when you stop carrying it alone and start placing it before God, something begins to align inside you. In the first letter of John chapter 1 verse 7, it is written that when we walk in the light, we are purified. This means that what is revealed loses its power to imprison. God does not work in the hidden parts of your pain. He works when you open space for Him to enter. And maybe you have never truly stopped to do that. Not superficially, not quickly, not automatically, but intentionally. God, this is weighing on me. This is hurting me. This is something I cannot carry anymore. That kind of surrender changes everything, because what has no name begins to be identified, and what is identified can be transformed. There is a silent belief that keeps you carrying all of this, an idea that feels true, but is quietly holding you captive. It is the thought that you should already be better, that you should have already overcome this, that you should be stronger by now, that you should have resolved this within yourself. And every time you feel tired again, frustrated again, overwhelmed again, that voice shows up telling you that something is wrong with you. But that voice does not come from God, because God never works with your timeline. He works with real processes. In the letter to the Galatians chapter 6 verse 9, it is written not to grow weary in doing good, because at the right time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. There is a right time, not your emotional timing, not other people's timing, not the internal pressure that keeps pushing you. God's timing. And God's timing does not rush because of anxiety, and it does not delay either. The problem is that you started measuring your healing based on unrealistic expectations. You look at yourself and think you should already be different, lighter, more resolved, stronger. But that creates a dangerous effect. Instead of resting in the process, you pressure yourself for not being where you think you should be. And that pressure exhausts you more than the situation itself. Because now you are not just dealing with the weight, you are fighting against yourself. But there is a truth that needs to realign everything inside you. God does not require you to be ready. He walks with you while you are being formed. In the book of the prophet Isaiah, chapter 40, verse 31, it is written that those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. Waiting is not doing nothing. Waiting is trusting while the process unfolds. And renewing does not mean going back to where you started. It means receiving a strength you have never had before. So the fact that you still feel tired does not mean God is not working. It means the process is still happening. And maybe instead of pressuring yourself so much, what you need is to change the way you see this moment. Because when you understand that God is working, even when you do not yet see results, the pressure begins to fade. And in place of pressure, something new begins to emerge. Trust. There is a subtle idea that has been distancing you from what you need the most. The idea that you need to get better before you come close to God. That you need to organize your thoughts, stabilize your emotions, fix what feels out of place inside you, and only then seek His presence the right way. But that is not true. God is not waiting for your strong version. He is not waiting for you to improve. He is available exactly in your tired state. In the book of the prophet Isaiah, chapter 55, verse 8, it is written that God's thoughts are not like our thoughts. That means what you believe is the wrong moment is often exactly the moment when God chooses to act. Because He does not move based on your performance. He moves based on your surrender. And here is the point that changes everything. You think you need to improve to get closer, but God wants you to get closer so He can begin to restore you. In the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 4, verse 16, It is written that we can approach the throne of grace with confidence to receive mercy and find grace in the time of need. Notice this, not after everything is fixed, in the time of need. And the time of need is often exactly when you feel the weakest, the most confused, the most exhausted, because that is where God's grace becomes most evident. But there is a barrier. As long as you believe you need to be okay before seeking God, you distance yourself at the very moment you need Him the most. And that prolongs your exhaustion, because you keep trying to solve alone what God has already made Himself available to carry with you. But when you break this belief, when you understand that you can come as you are, without filters, without masks, without preparation, something shifts immediately. God's presence stops being something distant and becomes a real refuge. You do not need to organize everything to pray. You do not need the perfect words. You do not need to be strong. You just need to be willing. Because God does not reject those who come tired. He receives them. He sustains them. He begins to rebuild them from the inside out. And at that point, something different starts to happen. A relief that does not come from resolved circumstances, but from the certainty that you are no longer carrying everything alone. There is a level of exhaustion that does not come only from life. It comes from the effort of trying to keep believing. A spiritual exhaustion that few people can explain. You pray, but it feels like you are just repeating words. You try to hold on to faith, but inside there is a where you cannot explain. It is not the absence of God. It is the excess of effort trying to sustain something that already feels heavy inside you. And that creates confusion, because you start thinking, if I believe, why do I feel like this? If I keep seeking, why do I feel empty sometimes? But there is a truth that changes this perspective. Faith can also wear out when it is lived as constant effort instead of real dependence. In the letter to the Romans, chapter 8, verse 26, it is written that the Spirit helps us in our weakness, because we do not even know how to pray as we should, but the Spirit Himself intercedes for us. This reveals something deep. Even in your difficulty to believe, God is already acting. Even when you do not know how to pray, God does not step away. He steps into that space and begins to sustain you from within. The problem is that you tried to keep everything functioning on your own. You tried to keep your faith active, your hope steady, your confidence stable, as if all of it depended only on you. And that is exhausting, because faith was not created to be sustained by your strength. It was created to connect you to God's strength. And when that connection weakens, even if you keep doing everything right, inside a silent exhaustion begins to grow. You keep going, but without energy. You keep going, but without peace. You keep going, but without real rest. And that is exactly where God begins to act differently. In the book of the prophet Isaiah, chapter 40, verse 29, it is written that He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Notice this. God does not ignore spiritual exhaustion. He responds to it. But for that to happen, you need to stop trying to sustain alone what can only be sustained by His presence. You do not need to force faith. You need to position yourself before God with honesty, even tired, even without words, even without feeling anything in that moment. Because it is not about what you can generate. It is about what God releases when you surrender. And when that surrender happens, something begins to shift from the inside out. The pressure decreases, the soul slows down, and God's presence stops being a concept and becomes real support. There is a way God begins the process of restoration that happens every single day, but you may have never seen it the right way. You were taught to see the night as just the end of a tiring day, But God sees the night as the beginning of an invisible process of restoration. While everything slows down, while the noise fades, while you finally stop, something begins to happen that you cannot see but you can feel. The night is not just a physical pause, it is a spiritual space. It is a sacred reset. In the book of Psalms, chapter 4, verse 8, it is written that in peace we lie down and sleep, because the Lord makes us dwell in safety. Notice what that reveals. True rest does not begin when the body stops. It begins when the soul trusts. And that is exactly what God wants to activate in you. Because during the day you fight, you solve, you respond, you carry. During the day your mind stays busy, your heart stays pressured, your energy is constantly consumed. But the night is different. The night is when God begins to reorganize what the day disordered inside you. But there is a problem. You carry the day into the night. You carry the worries, the thoughts, the tensions, the unresolved conversations, the full weight into the moment that was meant for release. And because of that, even when you stop, you do not rest. But there is a spiritual principle that changes this. In the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 5, verse 12, it is written that the sleep of a laborer is sweet, not just because of exhaustion, but because of surrender. Because when you understand that you did what you could and that the rest is in God's hands, something inside you slows down. And that is when the night becomes an environment of healing. God does not need you to be awake to act. He does not depend on your control. In fact, many of the deepest things He does happen when you let go, when you stop trying to solve everything, when you finally allow Him to take over what you can no longer carry. And maybe that is what has been missing. Not more effort, more surrender. Because as long as you try to control even the moment of rest, you block what God wants to do in that space. But when you turn the night into an act of trust, everything changes. Your mind slows down, your heart realigns, and God's presence begins to work at levels you cannot reach during the day. You are conditioned to believe that resting means stopping productivity. But in God's design, rest is an act of faith. Rest is trust. And true trust requires more faith than continuing to try to solve everything on your own, because rest is not just laying your body down. It is releasing control. It is accepting that there is a human limit, and that God not only knows that limit, but chose to act beyond it. And this is where many people struggle, because stopping feels dangerous. It feels like if you do not think a little more, fix one more detail, try one more time, everything might fall apart. But there is a spiritual truth that confronts this directly. In Psalm 127, verse 2, it is written that it is useless to rise early and stay up late, working hard for food, because God grants sleep to those He loves. This is not about laziness. It is about dependence. It is about understanding that there is a part of your life that does not respond to your effort. It responds to God's action. And as long as you insist on controlling everything, you exhaust yourself trying to occupy a place that was never yours. The place of sustaining everything. That place belongs to God. And when you try to take it, the result is exactly what you are feeling now. Constant exhaustion. An overwhelmed mind, a restless soul. But when you begin to rest intentionally, something shifts inside you. You are not giving up. You are surrendering. You are not ignoring reality. You are trusting that God is working in it, even when you are not looking. And that activates something powerful. In the book of Exodus, chapter 14, verse 14, it is written that the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Notice the level of this. There is a part of the battle that is not won through effort, but through surrender. And maybe what God is trying to teach you in this moment is not how to fight more, but how to release more. Because as long as you keep carrying everything, you stay exhausted. But when you learn to rest as an act of faith, you create space for God to do what you could never do alone. And this is not theory, it is practice. It is a decision that begins today. You feel like you have lost something. Strength, motivation, clarity, energy. And deep down there is a constant attempt to recover it on your own, as if at some point you had full control over that strength. But here is the truth that changes everything. That strength was never yours to sustain alone. It was always a flow, not a storage. It was never something you receive once and keep forever. It is something God releases continuously. And when you try to sustain on your own what was meant to be received daily, the inevitable result is exhaustion. In the book of Lamentations, chapter 3, verses 22 and 23, it is written that the Lord's mercies are new every morning. This reveals a principle. God does not give you strength once for all time. He renews it every single day, at the right time, in the right measure. But for that renewal to happen, you need to return to the source. And that is exactly what may have been lost. You kept moving forward, kept solving, kept pushing through, but you stopped repositioning yourself daily before God to receive what only He can give. And little by little, you began living on low reserves, trying to compensate with effort what could only be restored in His presence. In the book of the prophet Isaiah, chapter 40, verse 29, it is written that God gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Notice the detail. He does not complement your strength. He creates strength where there is none left. That means your current state does not limit what God can do. In fact, it is exactly in that place of lack that He begins to act more intensely. But there is a silent condition. You need to stop trying to recover on your own what can only be received, because as long as you insist on producing strength, you distance yourself from the source that releases it. But when you understand that you do not need to generate it, only connect to it, something shifts immediately. The pressure decreases, the guilt fades, and in place of effort, something lighter, more real and deeper begins to rise. Dependence. And it is in that place that strength begins to return. Not suddenly, but consistently, real, sustainable. There is something happening beyond what you can see. Something God does exactly when you stop trying to control everything. There is a part of God's work that you cannot track, because He does not depend on your perception to act. He does not need your awareness to begin restoring. Many times He chooses to act precisely when you are not looking. And this confronts a need you may not even realize you have. The need to see in order to believe. You want signs. You want clear answers. You want to feel that something is changing. But God does not limit His work to what you can perceive. In the book of Psalms, chapter 121, verses 3 and 4, it is written that God neither slumbers nor sleeps. He watches over you continuously. That means while you stop, He continues. While you rest, He sustains. While you let go, He works. But there is a silent block. You try to follow everything. You try to understand every detail, anticipate outcomes, control the process, and that keeps you in a constant state of alert, preventing real rest. Because deep down you feel like if you are not paying attention, something might fall apart. But God has never lost control. In the book of the prophet Isaiah, chapter 64, verse 4, it is written that God acts on behalf of those who wait for Him. Notice this. He acts, even when you do not see, even when you do not feel it, even when it seems like nothing is happening. And maybe this is one of the greatest challenges of faith. to trust what is not visible, to accept that silence does not mean absence, to understand that the time when you cannot see is often the time when God is doing the deepest work within you. Because what He does first is not external, it is internal. He aligns your thoughts, He adjusts your emotions, He repositions your perspective. He strengthens areas that were weakened. And all of this happens outside of your conscious control, but completely within His control. And when you understand this, something inside you slows down. You stop trying to monitor everything. You stop demanding immediate answers. You stop exhausting yourself trying to see signs all the time, and you begin to trust. Because you know that even in silence, God is active. And that changes the way you move through this moment. There comes a point where you feel like you have reached the end. Not because everything around you has ended, but because something inside you can no longer continue the same way. It feels like your strength has been pushed to its maximum, and then pushed beyond it. And usually that moment feels frightening. It feels like loss of control. It feels like weakness. It feels like you failed to sustain what you were supposed to. But in God's perspective, this is not an ending. It is a beginning. For God, your limit becomes the starting point of something new. In the book of the prophet Isaiah, chapter 43, verse 19, God declares that He is doing a new thing, something already beginning, even if you do not yet perceive it. This reveals something powerful. God's new work does not begin when everything is organized. It begins when what was old can no longer sustain itself. And maybe that is exactly what is happening inside you. What used to work no longer works. The way you used to deal with things is no longer effective. The way you tried to stay strong is no longer enough. And this is not a problem. It is a sign that God is leading you into a new way of living, a new way of trusting, a new way of depending on Him. But for the new to begin, something must be left behind. And that is where many people resist. Because letting go of what is familiar, even if it is exhausting you, feels risky. It feels uncertain. But continuing the same way costs more. In the Gospel of John, chapter 12, verse 24, Jesus teaches that unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone, but if it dies, it produces much fruit. This shows that there is a necessary process. Something must end for something greater to be born, and that ending is not always comfortable, but it is essential, because your limit is not the place where God abandons you. It is the place where He begins to rebuild you in a way you have never experienced before. And when you stop resisting this process, when you accept that you cannot continue the same way, something shifts. The internal struggle decreases, the pressure turns into surrender, and what once felt like collapse begins to reveal purpose. There is something inside you that still needs to be released, something you have been carrying without realizing it was never your responsibility. There is a weight in your life that did not come from God, and as long as you keep carrying it, you will remain tired, no matter how much you try to rest, because it is not only about how much you carry, it is about what you are carrying. Many of the things exhausting you today were never placed on you by God. They were assumed over time. Responsibilities that were not yours. Expectations you decided to meet. Guilt you absorbed. Pressures you accepted without realizing. And little by little, this became part of your routine. You got used to living overloaded. You got used to solving everything, being available all the time, not saying no, holding what no one else wanted to hold. But God never asked that of you. In the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verse 6, it is written that there is a time to keep and a time to let go. There comes a moment when continuing to carry is no longer responsibility. It becomes disobedience to the care God wants to give you. Because when you insist on carrying what He did not give you, You occupy space that should be free for what truly matters, and that wears you down. It confuses you. It distances you from the lightness God wants to give you. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 4, verse 23, it is written to guard your heart, because from it flow the issues of life. But how can you guard your heart if it is overloaded with things that were never meant to be there? That is why this moment requires a decision, not emotional, not impulsive, but intentional. What are you carrying right now that God never asked you to carry? Maybe it is the need to please everyone. Maybe it is the weight of solving problems that are not yours. Maybe it is guilt that could have been released a long time ago. Maybe it is an expectation you created that is now suffocating you. And as long as you do not identify it, you remain trapped in a cycle of exhaustion. But when you begin to let go, when you intentionally return to God what does not belong to you, something changes immediately. The weight decreases, the mind clears, the heart breathes again, because you return to your rightful place and you allow God to take His place. And when that happens, something deeper begins to emerge, something quieter but extremely powerful, a new way of listening, a new way of perceiving, a new way of connecting. For a long time you tried to find answers in the middle of noise. Racing thoughts, constant worries, external voices giving opinions, internal pressure demanding more. All of this created an environment where it becomes difficult to even perceive what God is saying. Because God does not compete with noise, He speaks in a different way. In the first book of Kings, chapter 19, verses 11 and 12, the prophet Elijah experiences something profound. God was not in the strong wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire. God was in a gentle whisper. This completely changes the way you seek direction, because maybe you are expecting something intense, immediate, visible, but God is speaking in a simple, calm, continuous way. And the problem is not that God is not speaking. It is that the noise is too loud. Noise of anxiety, noise of fear, noise of comparison, noise of information overload. All of this drowns out what truly matters. And little by little, you lose spiritual sensitivity. Not because God stepped away, but because you became too overwhelmed to perceive Him. And this is where something needs to change. You do not need more external answers. You need internal stillness. In the book of Psalms, chapter 46, verse 10, it is written, "Be still and know that I am God." Notice the order. First, be still. Then, recognize. This means the clarity you are looking for does not come from mental effort. It comes from a posture of calm before God. But stillness is not easy, because when you stop, everything you avoided begins to surface. Thoughts you pushed away, feelings you ignored, insecurities you did not want to face. And that is why many times you choose to stay busy, just to avoid dealing with it. But it is exactly in the silence that God begins to organize everything. He does not just speak, He aligns, He adjusts. He brings understanding where there was only confusion. And this process is not loud, it is deep, it is continuous, and it transforms from the inside out. When you learn to value this place, when you begin to create space for this whisper, something changes in the way you live. You no longer react to everything. You no longer get lost in every thought. You no longer become dominated by what you feel. Because now there is a stronger voice, not louder, but clearer. And that gives you direction. There is a specific moment when this clarity turns into decision, a point where you stop resisting and begin to live differently. There is something that needs to change in the way you face this moment. You were conditioned to fight for everything. Fight to maintain, fight to fix, fight not to fall, fight to keep going. And without realizing it, You brought that same mindset into your spiritual life. But today, God is not calling you to fight more. He is calling you to receive. Because there is a point where continuing to try does not strengthen you, it wears you out even more. And maybe you have already reached that point. In the second book of Chronicles, chapter 20, verse 17, it is written, "You will not need to fight this battle. Take your positions, stand firm, and see the deliverance the Lord will give you." Pay attention to this. It is not about doing more. It is about positioning yourself and trusting. But this confronts something inside you. Because receiving requires surrender, it requires letting go of control. It requires accepting that you cannot fix everything. And for someone who is used to carrying everything alone, this feels uncomfortable. But it is exactly in that discomfort that God begins to act more deeply. Because while you fight, you rely on your strength. But when you receive, you connect to His strength. And His strength is not limited to what you can do. It reaches what you cannot. It sustains what you can no longer carry. It restores what you thought was already lost. In the book of the prophet Isaiah, chapter 30, verse 15, it is written that in quietness and trust is your strength. This redefines everything. Your strength is not in the intensity of your effort. It is in the depth of your trust. And today is a clear invitation. Stop trying to prove that you can handle everything. Stop trying to solve everything on your own. Stop carrying what has already exhausted you and begin to do something different. Receive. Receive the peace you could not produce. Receive the strength you could not recover. Receive the care of God that has always been available. Because when you shift from effort to surrender, something aligns inside you. The pressure decreases, the weight shifts, and God's presence begins to occupy spaces that were once filled by your own effort. And it is in this place that everything converges, where exhaustion finds an answer, where the soul finds rest, where your story begins to change direction. There is something happening inside you right now, even if you cannot fully measure it yet. This is not just a passing emotion. It is not just a temporary relief. This is a repositioning. Because when you understand what God is doing in the middle of your exhaustion, you do not remain the same person who started this day. In the book of Psalms, chapter 30, verse 5, it is written that weeping may last through the night, but joy comes in the morning. This is not just about time. It is about transformation. The night that felt heavy becomes the place where God began to move. The exhaustion that felt like the end becomes the point where He started something new within you. And when the morning comes, something has changed. Maybe everything around you is not fully resolved yet. Maybe some situations are still exactly where they were. But you are not, because now you understand you do not have to carry everything alone. You do not have to sustain a strength that does not come from you. You do not have to fight every battle. You do not have to live overwhelmed to prove anything. God is with you, and more than that, He is working. In the book of Lamentations, chapter 3, verse 25, it is written that the Lord is good to those who wait for Him. Waiting now is no longer doubt. It is trust. It is knowing that even when you do not see it, God is still working. And that changes the way you wake up. You do not rise with the same weight. You do not begin your day with the same pressure. You do not carry the same tension. Because something has been adjusted inside you. Something has been released. Something has been realigned. And even if the process continues, now there is a different foundation. A foundation of trust. Foundation of dependence. A foundation of peace. And that is what will sustain you from now on. You may have started this day tired, but you will not end it the same way. And when you wake up, you will notice the strength has returned. not because you forced it, but because God renewed it. Good night.